In the heart of the eclipse's shadow, where the moon bled silver into the void, a single life stirred like a forbidden prophecy. Eileen Frostmere staggered through the Vidral forest, her breath a ragged ghost against the unrelenting storm. Snow lashed her face like accusations, each flake a reminder of the pack's verdict. Cursed, they had called her, their voices echoing in the great hall under the fractured light of that fateful night. The child within her, conceived when the Luna eclipsed the sun in a rare alignment, was no blessing but a blight. A harbinger of doom, whispered the elders, their eyes gleaming with the cold fire of fear. At 29, she had known rejection before, the subtle shunning of an omega whose heats brought no mate. But this was exile carved in blood and banishment. They had stripped her of her furs, her place by the hearth, and driven her into the white wilderness with nothing but the thin shift clinging to her swollen belly and the weight of their scorn. The wind howled through the ancient pines, twisting like the serpents of old tales, carrying distant weavos that might have been wolves or the ghosts of her former kin. Eileen's bare feet sank into the drifts, numb now, the cold seeping into her bones as if to claim her from the inside out. She pressed a hand to her abdomen, feeling the faint kick, a spark of defiance amid the storm's fury. "Not yet," she murmured to the unborn one, her voice lost in the gale. Not like this, but weakness clawed at her. The journey from the pack's stronghold had been days of flight, evading the hunters they had surely sent to ensure her end. Humiliation burned hotter than any frost. Better to perish in anonymity than return to face the Alpha's indifferent gaze, or worse, the pity of those who once called her sister. The forest deepened, its shadows swallowing the last traces of the world she knew. Vidral was no gentle wood. It was the realm's untamed fringe, where the veil between man and beast thinned under the moon's watchful eye. Legend spoke of it as the Deuce's testing ground, where the unworthy froze and the marked found revelation. Eileen had never believed such whispers, until now, when every step felt like a plea to the Divine Mother for mercy she did not deserve. Her vision blurred, not from tears, but exhaustion, and she stumbled against a gnarled trunk, its bark rough as the scars of betrayal. Blood trickled from a cut on her palm, where thorns had torn her skin earlier. She watched it freeze into crimson crystals on the snow, a stark bloom against the endless white. The metallic tang filled her nostrils, mingling with the sharp pine and the storm's wet chill. Deeper she pressed, guided by instinct more than map, until the trees parted to reveal a forgotten hollow. There, half buried in the drift, stood the hunter's cabin, its timbers weathered to gray, roof sagging under years of neglect. No smoke rose from its chimney, no light pierced its cracks. It was a ruin, abandoned to the wild, yet to Eileen it gleamed like salvation's cruel jest. She clawed at the door, hinges groaning in protest, and tumbled inside. The air within was stale, thick with dust and the faint rot of old furs, but it shielded her from the wind's knife edge. She collapsed onto a splintered bench, curling around her belly as if to shield the life within from the world's judgment. Darkness settled, broken only by the sliver of moonlight filtering through a shattered window. Eileen's breaths came shallow, her body a vessel of fire and ice. The child stirred again, a ripple of warmth that both sustained and terrified her. What strength was this, she wondered in the silence, if not the mercy of choosing death on her terms? The pack had deemed her child a curse, born of celestial misalignment, destined to unravel the bonds of loyalty and blood. But in the quiet, with the storm raging outside like the Deuce's wrath, Eileen felt a deeper truth uncoil. Curses were but shadows of fear, and shadows fled before the light of what must be. Hours blurred into the numb haze of half-sleep, her mind drifting to the eclipse night, the moon's disk devouring the sun, the air humming with unnatural power. She had lain with a wanderer then, a fleeting union under the stars, unaware of the omens. Now, that moment defined her ruin. The cabin's walls seemed to whisper back, ancient voices in the wood, speaking of hidden paths and forgotten graces. Yet doubt gnawed. Was this refuge or grave? The cold crept in regardless, her fingers blue-tinged, her pulse a distant drum. As dawn's pale fingers clawed at the horizon, a sound pierced the storm's dying roar, paws on snow, soft and multitudinous, encircling the cabin like a living noose. Eileen froze, heart slamming against her ribs, the scent of fur and wild earth flooding the air. Through the window's gap, she glimpsed them. Dozens of wolves, their coats silvered by frost, eyes glowing like embers in the half-light. They stood in absolute stillness, a ring of shadowed forms against the whitening world. Then, as one, they lowered their heads, muzzles dipping to the snow in reverence, not rage. Eileen's breath caught, a tremor of something ancient stirring within her, a pull beyond fear, like the moon calling to the tide. The child kicked fiercely now, as if in answer, and for the first time the wilderness felt not like exile, but the threshold of a revelation she could neither name nor deny. The door to the cabin creaked open with the weight of inevitability, admitting a gust of wind that carried the scent of pine resin and distant blood. Eileen's pulse thundered in her ears, drowning the fading storm, as a figure stepped across the threshold, tall, shadowed, his silhouette framed by the dawn's reluctant glow. He moved with the deliberate grace of one who commanded the wild, yet his broad shoulders sagged under an unseen burden, his cloak torn and dusted with frost. Alpha King Soren Wildheart, though she did not yet know his name, bore the marks of a man pursued. A gash across his forearm wept crimson onto the snow-matted floor, and his eyes, storm-gray and haunted, scanned the dim interior before locking onto her. She shrank back against the bench, one arm cradling her belly, the other clutching a splintered plank as if it could ward off the intruder. Fear coiled in her chest like a serpent, sharp and primal, yet beneath it stirred something unbidden. A curiosity that tugged at her core, warm as a hidden ember. The wolves outside had not lunged, they had bowed. And now this stranger, reeking of authority and anguish, filled the space with his presence, the air thickening around him like mist before a revelation. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice cracking on the words, barely audible over the crackle of settling snow against the walls. Soren paused, his breath visible in the chill, ragged from exertion or older wounds. At 46, he was no young conqueror, but a king forged in the fires of endless winters, his face etched with lines of duty's cruel arithmetic, his dark hair streaked with silver like veins of ore in ancient rock. Guilt shadowed him deeper than any curse. The realm's fractures were his inheritance, betrayals from within his own council, gnawing at the edges of his rule. He had ridden through the night, evading assassins disguised as allies, his wolves scattering to draw the hunt away. Vidral Forest was his last sanctuary, a place of exile for the weary and the damned. But the sight of her, pale, swollen with life, eyes wide with defiance, struck him like a blade to the heart. The wolves' reverence was no accident. It was the Deusa's whisper, binding fates in the eclipse's lingering echo. "I am Soren," he said, his voice low and resonant, carrying the timbre of thunder rolled soft over mountains. He did not advance, respecting the fear that radiated from her like heat from a dying fire. Instead, he knelt slowly, wincing as the motion pulled at his injury, blood dripping in rhythmic patters onto the worn planks. "King of the wild clans, and you are the one they call cursed?" The question hung between them, not accusation, but a seeking, his gaze flickering to her abdomen where the child rested, quiet now, as if listening. Eileen's throat tightened, the word cursed a lash across her spirit. She had fled to embrace oblivion, not to be found by royalty, not to bear her shame before eyes that judged from thrones. Instinct urged her to deny the pull she felt, the way his scent, earth and storm, and faint wild herbs wove into her senses, stirring the omega within her to a restless hum. It was madness, this instinctive tether, born of the moon's cruel jest during the eclipse. She rationalized it as survival's trick, a desperate illusion in the face of threat. "Leave me," she said, forcing steel into her tone, though her body betrayed her with a shiver that had little to do with cold. "I've chosen my end. Your wolves. Whatever game this is, it's not for me." But Soren did not rise. His eyes, those depths of gray flecked with gold like stars in twilight, held hers without demand, only a quiet intensity that peeled back her defenses. Outside, the wolves shifted, their low whines a chorus of affirmation, paws etching patterns in the snow that caught the first light, symbols of the Diusa, ancient and unyielding. He understood the sign as surely as the blood moon's prophecy. The child she carried was no blight, but the realm's anchor, conceived in celestial fire to mend what his failures had torn. Guilt twisted in him anew. He, who had lost a mate to treachery years past, who bore the weight of a crown stained by inaction, saw in her not weakness, but the mercy he had long forsaken. "No game," he murmured, extending a hand not to touch, but to offer, palm up, bloodied yet steady. "The forest bows to you, as do they, and I seek no conquest here, only truth." Curiosity warred with terror in Aline's breast, her fingers itching to bridge the gap despite the rational scream in her mind. He was alpha, king, everything her pack had warned against. Yet the air between them hummed, charged like the eve of storm, and the child stirred once more, a flutter that echoed the distant Weavos. She rationalized it as pity, perhaps, his wounds, his weariness mirroring her own exile. But deeper, unacknowledged, the connection bloomed instinctive and raw, a thread of silver light in the gloom, denied yet undeniable. The cabin, once a tomb, now felt like the eye of a greater tempest, where fear and wonder collided under the Diusa's gaze. Soren's gaze never wavered, the silence stretching taut as bowstring. Blood from his arm traced a slow path across the floor, pooling near her feet, a crimson sigil against the dust, symbolic of the bonds yet to form. The wind outside whispered secrets through the cracks, carrying the scent of impending refuge as the first rays pierced the window, gilding their forms in reluctant gold. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The dawn's light clawed through the cabin's cracks like hesitant fingers, illuminating the crimson trail Soren's blood had etched across the floorboards, a fragile bridge between exile and unknown allegiance. Aline's gaze lingered on it, the metallic scent sharp in the stale air, mingling with the earthy musk of the man before her. Her hand trembled, hovering above his offered palm, rationalizing the pull as mere exhaustion's delusion, a survival instinct twisting fear into fragile trust. Yet the child within her shifted, a warm insistence against the cold knot in her chest, as if urging her toward the precipice. She did not take his hand. Instead, she rose unsteadily, the bench creaking beneath her, and back toward the shadowed corner where a rusted lantern hung like a forgotten relic. "Truth," she echoed, her voice a threadbare whisper laced with bitterness. "The pack's truth branded me cursed. Yours will be no different." The words tasted of ash, born from years of quiet endurance, the Omega who mended wounds but bore none of her own, now swollen with a life deemed profane. Outside, the wolves' whines softened to a vigilant hum, their forms a silver-ringed sentinel against the forest's awakening. Soren withdrew his hand slowly, the motion deliberate, his gray eyes reflecting the growing light like storm clouds veined with reluctant dawn. Guilt etched deeper into his features, a king's melancholy forged in the crucible of betrayals he could not unmake. His mate's death lingered in every shadow, a specter of inaction that haunted his nights, whispering that power without compassion was but a hollow crown. "The eclipse's child," he said softly, not pressing but revealing, his voice carrying the weight of prophecies half remembered. "The Deusa marks what men fear. My wolves sense it. The reverence is no trick of the wild." He glanced at the door, ears attuned to the forest's murmurs, where the wind carried faint echoes of pursuit, the snap of distant branches, the low growl of hounds not his own. Eileen's breath hitched, the air thickening with unspoken peril. She had fled the pack's hunters, but Vidrill's depths hid greater threats, rival alphas from fractured clans, whispers of council traitors who sought to topple Soren's throne amid the realm's unraveling wars. The eclipse had stirred unrest, omens twisted into weapons by those hungry for power. Her hand pressed instinctively to her belly, shielding the spark that had drawn this king's gaze, and in that gesture, empathy flickered. His wounds mirrored her exile, blood spilled for fates neither had chosen. Before she could retort, the forest erupted. A guttural snarl shattered the fragile peace, followed by the thunder of paws. Not the reverent circle of Soren's wolves, but a feral pack crashing through the underbrush, their eyes burning with the red haze of enchantment. Shadowed figures flanked them on foot, cloaked in black furs emblazoned with the rival sigil of House Grimclaw, their blades glinting like ice shards under the rising sun. Assassins, sent to claim the king's head and any who stood in their path, their scents acrid with dark herbs that twisted beasts to madness. Soren surged to his feet, a low growl rumbling from his chest, his body coiling like a storm about to break. "Stay back," he commanded, positioning himself between Eileen and the door, his injured arm no hindrance to the fluid power of his stance. Blood seeped anew, but he ignored it, drawing a dagger from his boot with teeth bared in defiance. His wolves answered the call, bursting into motion, a whirlwind of silver fur and snapping jaws that met the intruders head-on. The clash echoed through the cabin walls, snarls twisting into yelps, the wet rip of flesh, snow churned to bloody slush beyond the threshold. Eileen's heart pounded, terror flooding her veins like ice water, yet she did not cower. The child kicked fiercely, a surge of primal fire that steadied her trembling limbs. Rationalization shattered under the visceral roar. This was no illusion, but shared peril binding them in the cabin's dim sanctuary. She grabbed the lantern's chain, yanking it free as an improvised weapon, its iron weight cold and unyielding in her grip. Through the window's gap, she saw the fray. Soren's wolves forming a living barrier, their loyalty a fierce poetry of motion, while the Grimclaw beasts lunged with enchanted frenzy, foam-flecked muzzles seeking throats. One assassin broke through, a wiry figure with eyes like coals, blade raised to strike at Soren's exposed flank. Time slowed, the air humming with the Deusa's invisible thread. Eileen moved without thought, swinging the lantern in a wide arc that caught the intruder's temple with a sickening crack. He crumpled, blood blooming dark against the snow-dusted floor, his dagger skittering into the shadows. Soren whirled, surprise flashing in his eyes. Not pity, but recognition. A king's guarded respect for the Omega who had chosen to fight beside him. The battle raged on, Uivos piercing the morning like shattered crystal, the scent of blood and pine resin thick as fog. Soren dispatched another foe with a precise thrust, his movements a dance of controlled fury, but exhaustion tugged at him, his wound sapping strength. Eileen pressed close now, her back to the wall, scanning for threats, her breath sinking with his in the confined space. Empathy bloomed in the chaos. She saw the guilt in his tensed shoulders, the duty that chained him to endless war. He glimpsed the quiet steel in her, the rejection that had not broken but tempered her. "Why protect me?" she gasped as a wolf's body thudded against the door, buying them moments. "Because the Deusa weaves us together," he replied, his voice roughened by exertion, gray eyes meeting hers amid the storm of violence. "And because no curse survives when mercy stands against it." The words hung, a philosophical anchor in the visceral tide, stirring the bond from instinct to something deeper, a tether of shared vulnerability, where her fear met his melancholy, forging empathy into quiet alliance. As the last snarls faded, the forest falling silent save for the wolves' labored pants, Soren slumped against the wall beside her, blood staining his cloak. Eileen knelt, tearing a strip from her shift to bind his arm, her touch tentative yet sure, the warmth of her fingers a revelation against his chilled skin. The child stirred softly now, as if soothed by the fragile peace, and in that shared breath, the cabin transformed from refuge to crucible, where exile met kingship, and the first threads of redemption wove through the pain. Outside, the sun climbed higher, gilding the bloodied snow in reluctant gold, while the wind whispered of trials yet to come. Eileen wondered, in the quiet aftermath, what strength lay in this bond, not power's roar, but the mercy of standing unbroken together. The sun's reluctant ascent painted the cabin's bloodied floor in hues of tarnished gold, turning the crimson pools into sigils that seemed to pulse with lingering life. Eileen's fingers, still warm from binding Soren's wound, lingered a moment too long on the rough cloth strip, the metallic tang of his blood clinging to her skin like an unspoken vow. Her heart echoed the child's soft flutters, a rhythm that synced with the alpha's steady breaths beside her. The air heavy with the aftermath's hush, panting wolves beyond the door, the acrid smoke of singed fur wafting through cracks, and the faint underlying chill of Vidral's eternal winter seeping back in. She pulled away, rising on unsteady legs, the weight of her belly a constant anchor pulling her toward the earth. Rationalization flickered in her mind like a dying ember. This alliance was born of necessity, nothing more, a fleeting shield against the storm's remnants, not the weaving of fates he spoke of so gravely. Yet the Deuce's thread tugged insistent, a warmth uncoiling in her core that defied the cold logic of her exile. Soren watched her, his gray eyes shadowed by exhaustion, the lines of his face deepening as he tested his bandaged arm, flexing fingers stained with the battle's residue. Guilt shadowed him still, a king's burden etched in every furrow, the memory of lost battles and unspoken failures pressing like frost on his soul. "We cannot linger," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the timbers, stirring dust motes into lazy spirals. "The Grimclaws will send more. Their sorcery twists the wild against us." He rose, movements measured, retrieving his dagger from where it had fallen amid the intruders' strewn forms. One body lay crumpled near the threshold, its black cloak torn, revealing a tattoo of jagged thorns, the mark of traitors within his own fractured council, hungry for the throne's unraveling amid the realm's border wars. Soren's jaw tightened, melancholy deepening. He had trusted too long, his ethical code, a chain that bound him to mercy even as it invited the blade. Eileen nodded, though fear coiled anew in her chest, sharp as the wind's distant howl slicing through the pines. She gathered what little the cabin offered, a frayed blanket to wrap around her shoulders, its wool coarse against her skin, carrying the faint, musty scent of long-gone hunters. Stepping outside, the snow crunched underfoot, bloodied patches steaming faintly in the crisp air, the metallic bite mingling with pine sap and the earthy musk of the wolves now circling protectively. Soren's pack regarded her with unwavering eyes, golden flecks catching the light, their reverence a silent affirmation that chilled and intrigued her in equal measure. What power did her child hold to command such loyalty from beasts unbound by oath? They moved deeper into Vidril's heart, Soren leading with purposeful strides, his limp masked by sheer will. Eileen followed, the blanket trailing like a beggar's train, her breaths clouding the air in rhythmic puffs. The forest enveloped them, ancient trunks looming like silent judges, their bark etched with frost-laced runes that seemed to whisper under the wind's caress. Hours blurred in the trek, the sun climbing to midday's pale zenith, casting elongated shadows that danced like specters across the drifts. Exhaustion clawed at her, but the child's presence sustained, a quiet fire that pushed back the numbness, urging her onward. As twilight bled purple into the sky, they crested a ridge overlooking a hidden glen, a frozen lake mirroring the emerging stars, ringed by jagged rocks veined with quartz that gleamed like captured moonlight. Soren halted, signaling his wolves to form a perimeter, their forms melting into the gloom with practiced grace. "Here," he said, gesturing to a cleft in the stone, a natural alcove shielded by overhanging ice, its depths promising temporary sanctuary. "The Deuce's veil thins in such places. Rest. I will stand watch." Eileen sank onto the mossy ledge within, the cold stone biting through the blanket, but a strange calm settled over her, the air humming with an otherworldly hush. The child stirred restlessly now, not with kicks, but a deeper surge, like a tide rising within. She pressed her palms to her abdomen, eyes closing against the encroaching dusk, and in that vulnerability, the revelation uncoiled. Visions flickered behind her lids, not dreams, but fragments sharp as shattered crystal. The eclipse's silver-black maw, wolves bowing under a blood moon, a throne crumbling to ash only to reform in threads of light. Her blood sang with it, the same crimson that had marked the cabin floor now pulsing in her veins, awakening a gift long dormant. The Pathfinder's sight, the Omega's hidden lore to trace destinies woven by the Deusa's hand. Gasping, she opened her eyes to find Soren kneeling before her, his face illuminated by the first star's glow, concern etching his features into something raw and unguarded. "What is it?" he asked, his hand hovering near hers, not touching but close enough that his warmth pierced the chill. A king's restraint, born of guilt's heavy toll. Words failed her at first, the vision's weight pressing like the forest's silence. But then it spilled forth, instinctive and unbidden. "The child. It's no curse. It's the mender. I see it. The fractures in your realm, the betrayals coiling like serpents in the council. Grimclaw is but the fang. The heart lies in your own hall, a shadow advisor twisting oaths to war." Her voice steadied, the gift manifesting in clarity, her eyes glowing faintly with inner silver, reflecting the lake's mirror below. The air thickened, charged with lunar essence even in daylight's fade, the wind carrying a single, distant uivo that echoed her words. Soren's breath caught, recognition dawning like dawn over snow, slow, inevitable, piercing his melancholy core. He had sought signs in scrolls and stars, ethical dilemmas haunting his rule, to strike first against whispers of treason or hold to compassion's fragile peace. But here, in this rejected Omega, the Deusa revealed the key. Her sight, bound to the eclipse-born child, would illuminate the paths to redemption, turning his guilt-forged crown from burden to beacon. "You are the axis," he whispered, awe threading his tone, gray eyes locking with hers in a gaze that stripped away denials. The connection deepened, no longer mere instinct, but destiny's forge. Her vulnerability meeting his duty, empathy alchemizing into profound alliance. Yet doubt lingered in Eileen's heart, the gift's emergence a double-edged blade. To see truths meant bearing their pain, the realm's wounds now etched in her soul. The child settled, as if content in the revelation, while outside, the wolf's eyes gleamed in the gathering night, guardians of the turning point. Sorin rose, offering his cloak this time, its weight a symbolic mantle, bloodied yet warm. In that shared silence, under the emerging moon's watchful arc, Eileen felt the stirrings of acceptance. Not immediate love, but the resistant bloom of purpose, where rejection yielded to the Deusa's greater design. The wind sighed through the glen, carrying the promise of firelit councils and shadowed trials, as the stars wheeled overhead, indifferent witnesses to fate's intertwining. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your worth. The moon hung low over the glen like a watchful sentinel, its silver light fracturing on the frozen lake's surface, casting elongated shadows that clawed at the alcove's stone walls. Eileen's visions lingered in her veins, a silver current humming beneath her skin, the Pathfinder's gift no longer dormant but alive, insistent as the child's rhythmic pulses against her palm. She drew Sorin's cloak tighter around her shoulders, its wool heavy with the scent of pine blood and distant hearths, a borrowed warmth that both comforted and confined. Acceptance had bloomed resistant in her chest during the revelation's afterglow, yet now, as night deepened, doubt coiled like frost on her breath. Visions of betrayal's serpents in the council halls, the realm's fractures spiderwebbing from Sorin's throne, demanding she choose, wield this sight for a king's redemption or reclaim her freedom in exile's numb embrace. Sorin stood at the alcove's edge, his silhouette etched against the star-pricked sky, gray eyes scanning the tree line where his wolves patrolled with low, vigilant growls. The bandage on his arm had darkened with fresh seepage from the day's exertions, a crimson reminder of perils shared, but his posture remained unyielding, duty's melancholy, a cloak heavier than any fur. "The paths you saw," he said quietly, turning to her, his voice a gravelly murmur that stirred the air like wind through ancient boughs. "They lead to the heart of the storm, my hall, where the traitors fester. We must go, before the Grimclaw's sorcery draws more shadows." Eileen's throat tightened, the weight of her belly shifting as she rose, the stone's chill seeping through her soles like accusations from the earth itself. Freedom whispered in the wind's sigh, tempting her to slip away into Vidrill's depths, to birth her child in anonymity rather than entangle it in royal webs of war and guilt. The pack's rejection echoed in her mind, the elder's cold verdict under the eclipse, branding her womb a vessel of doom, yet the gift had unveiled a deeper truth. Her sight could mend, not destroy, if she dared. Rationalization frayed at the edges. This was no mere alliance, but a moral precipice, where compassion for Sorin's haunted gaze warred with the liberty of solitude. "And if I refuse?" she asked, her words sharp as ice shards, stepping into the moonlight that gilded her pale skin. "Your realm's shadows are not my chains. I've borne enough curses without forging new ones in blood." His eyes met hers, flecked with that golden stormlight, holding not command, but a raw vulnerability that pierced her defenses, the ethical king, bound by oaths he could not break, guilt over his lost mate, a specter that softened his resolve. "Then go," he replied, the admission costing him, his hand gesturing to the forest's maw. "But the Deuce's weave does not unravel so easily. The child, you, are the light against their darkness." Outside, a wolf's weavo rose, mournful and urgent, slicing the night like a blade through silk, heralding the confrontation she had glimpsed in visions, the past converging, not in the wild's fringe, but dragged to this sacred glen. The air thickened, charged with lunar essence, as the tree line erupted in chaos. Figures emerged from the gloom, not the feral Grimclaws, but her former pack, their furs dusted with snow, eyes gleaming with the fervor of hunters reclaimed. Leading them was Thorn, the alpha rival who had risen in her exile's wake, his broad frame scarred from old border skirmishes, his muzzle twisted in a snarl that bared fangs yellowed by rage. Betrayal hung on him like a shroud. He had whispered the curse's lie to the elders, twisting the eclipse's omen to claim her place and consolidate power amid the realm's wars. Flanking him were the Matilha's remnants, faces Eileen knew from hearthside gatherings, now hardened by fear and loyalty's blind forge, their breaths clouding in unified huffs. "You flee no longer, Omega," Thorn bellowed, his voice booming across the lake, echoing off the quartz-veined rocks like thunder in a cavern. "The child ends here, before it unravels us all." His pack fanned out, circling the wolves that bristled in defense, the standoff a tense ballet of fur and frost, weavos clashing in dissonant harmony. Blood scented the air anew, not yet spilled but promised, the metallic tang stirring Eileen's visions into sharper focus. Thorn's ambition, fed by council whispers, aimed to ally with Grimclaw traitors, toppling Soren to seize the wild clans under a banner of purified strength. Soren stepped forward, dagger drawn, his body a barrier of coiled power, but Eileen's hand caught his arm, the warmth of her touch a grounding fire amid the rising chill. Fear surged in her, visceral as the wind's lash, yet the gift ignited, silver light flickering in her eyes as she beheld the threads. Forgiveness could sever Thorn's ties to the shadows, exposing the true traitor in Soren's hall, or war would drown the realm in blood, claiming her child's future. "Wait," she breathed, her voice steadying, the child's kick a fierce affirmation against her ribs. The Matilla hesitated, their gazes flickering to her swollen form, remnants of old bonds warring with indoctrinated scorn. Thorn lunged, shifting mid-stride into a massive wolf, gray pelt rippling over muscle, jaws snapping toward Soren's throat. The glen exploded. Soren's wolves met the charge, a maelstrom of snarls and slashing claws, snow flying in white arcs that caught the moonlight like shattered stars. Eileen backed against the alcove, heart slamming, the cold stone biting her spine, but she did not flee. The gift pulled truths from the fray, visions of Thorn's youth, mentored by the same council shadow that haunted Soren, a brotherly bond twisted by ambition. Mercy or vengeance? The dilemma tore at her, philosophical weight pressing like the moon's gravity. Strength lay not in the kill, but in choosing compassion's blade over war's. Soren grappled with Thorn in wolf form, their bodies rolling across the frozen lake, cracks spiderwebbing the ice with ominous groans, blood spraying in crimson arcs that steamed on the frost. Eileen's cry pierced the din, raw and commanding, the Pathfinder's voice amplified by lunar power. "Thorn, the shadow in the hall, it was Eirik, your mentor, promising you the throne for Grimclaw's gold. See it, end this, or doom us all." Her words wove through the chaos, silver light pulsing from her, illuminating the traitor's face in Thorn's mind, a flash of revelation that staggered him mid-lunge. Thorn shifted back, human eyes wide with shock, chest heaving as he knelt in the snow, the fight draining from his pack like mist before dawn. Soren rose, bloodied but unbroken, his gaze turning to Eileen, not with triumph, but awe deepened by guilt's release, the ethical choice validated in her mercy. The Matilha bowed low, not in conquest, but contrition, the air humming with the Deusa's approval, a single weevo rising in unified reverence. Yet Eileen trembled, the vision's toll sapping her strength, the child stilling as if weighing the cost. Freedom slipped further from grasp. She had chosen the realm's mending over solitude, forgiveness forging a path to war's aversion, but at what price to her heart? Soren approached, his hand extended once more, palm scarred and steady, the moonlight gilding it in silver promise. In his eyes she saw not demand, but the quiet plea of a king redeemed by her light. Love resisted, yet inching toward acceptance, a moral tether binding exile to destiny. The wind whispered through the glen, carrying the scent of thawing blood and nascent peace, as the stars bore witness to the judgment's fragile dawn, dilemmas unresolved in the night's lingering chill. The moon's silver gaze softened over the glen, weaving threads of fragile truce through the bloodied snow, where the echoes of snarls faded into the night's profound hush. Eileen's knees buckled beneath her, the Pathfinder's visions receding like a tide, leaving her hollowed, the child's stillness a weight that pressed against her ribs like unspoken grief. The air hummed with the aftermath's residue, metallic blood mingling with the crisp bite of frost, the wolves' pants sinking into a low, rhythmic vigil that bordered on prayer. Thorn knelt still in the churned drifts, his broad shoulders slumped, the revelation's silver light etching lines of contrition across his scarred face. His pack mirrored him, heads bowed not in defeat, but in the raw unraveling of lies, their breaths clouding the air like ghosts of old loyalties dispersing. Soren's extended hand remained steady in the moonlight, palm scarred from battles long etched into his soul, the warmth radiating from it a counterpoint to the chill seeping into Eileen's bones. His gray eyes held hers, flecked with that golden storm depth, reflecting not the triumph of a king, but the quiet fracture of one whose guilt had found a mirror in her mercy. At 46, he was a monument to duty's erosion, melancholy carved into the set of his jaw, the silver streaks in his dark hair catching the lunar glow like veins of untarnished ore. The realm's fractures, once his solitary burden, now converged here, in this glen of quartz and ice, demanding a choice that transcended thrones, to bind his fractured crown to her light, or let the shadows claim them both. Eileen's fingers trembled as she considered that hand, the rational barriers she had erected crumbling under the vision's lingering pulse. Freedom had been her exile's cruel lure, a numb solitude where she could birth her child away from judgments and wars, shielding the spark from the world's devouring maw. Yet the Deus's weave pulled inexorably, the eclipse's legacy uncoiling in her blood, a crimson river that mirrored the pools staining the lake's cracked surface. Sacrifice loomed in the wind's whisper, to yield her hidden strength, to heal the realm's wounds, risking the child's future in the forge of union, or to withdraw, curing only her own isolation at the cost of Soren's unraveling kingdom. What was redemption? She pondered in the silence, if not the ache of choosing another's light over one's shadowed peace. The child's faint stir returned then, a flutter like moonlight on water, urging her toward the precipice where love resisted no longer, but bloomed tragic and true. "I see it all," she whispered, her voice threading through the hush like silk over steel, eyes glowing faintly with residual silver. The gift had stripped her bare, Eric's shadow in the council halls, his whispers to Thorn a poison born of greed, twisting border wars into civil inferno. But deeper, it unveiled Soren's core, the ethical king who had spared traitors in mercy's name, only to watch his mate fall to their blades years past, gilt a chain he wore as crown. Her pack's rejection, once a brand of curse, now reframed as the Deus's forge, tempering her into the axis that could mend or shatter. Thorn rose slowly, his gaze meeting hers with the weight of brotherhood betrayed. Eric. He promised purity, but it was chains. "Forgive this blindness, Eileen. Lead us back." The words hung, a moral fulcrum in the lunar light, as distant weavos rose from the tree line, Grimclaw's remnants. Drawn by the sorcery's frayed threads, their forms slinking through the shadows like specters cloaked in night. Soren tensed, his free hand drifting to his dagger, but Eileen stepped forward, the blanket slipping from her shoulders to pool at her feet, exposing the swell of her belly to the frost's bite. The cold clawed at her skin, visceral and unforgiving, yet it sharpened her resolve. The wind carrying the scent of impending blood, like a lover's dark promise. "No more war," she declared, her tone resonant with the Deusa's echo, the silver light surging anew in her veins. She clasped Soren's hand at last, the contact electric, a union of fire and ice, her warmth seeping into his chilled palm, his steady grip anchoring her against the gale's rising fury. The glen ignited in chaos once more, but this time Eileen stood at its heart. Visions cascaded, paths forking like lightning. Sacrifice in revealing Eric's lair within the ice castle spires, curing the realm's poison through Thorn's redeemed blade, or the ultimate union, binding her blood to Soren's in a ritual under the moon's full arc. Grimclaw wolves burst from the trees, eyes red with enchantment, their snarls a dissonant chorus against the lake's groaning ice. Soren's pack met them, a silver storm of loyalty, while Thorn and his kin joined the fray, their forms shifting in atonement's fury, claws rending fur, blood spraying in arcs that caught the moonlight like rubies on snow. Eileen released Soren's hand, the separation a brief wound, and moved to the lake's edge, her bare feet sinking into the bloody slush. The child thrashed now, a wild rhythm syncing with her pulse as she knelt and pressed palms to the cracking ice. Deusa, witness, she intoned, the Pathfinder's gift channeling through her, a silver radiance blooming from her touch, fracturing the enchantments like dawn shattering night. The Grimclaw beasts faltered, their red haze lifting, whines turning to confused retreats as the sorcery unraveled. Thorn dispatched the last, his blade sinking into enchanted flesh with a wet finality, the steam of spilled blood rising like incense to the moon. Soren reached her side, pulling her upright, his arms encircling her waist in a hold that was both shield and surrender. The heat of his body a balm against the night's deepening chill. Guilt's shadows lifted from his eyes, replaced by a profound acceptance, the king's melancholy yielding to the redemption her choice had forged. "You are the mender," he murmured against her hair, his breath warm on her temple, the scent of earth and blood enveloping her like a vow. Eileen leaned into him, the rational denial dissolving in the tide of union, sacrifice of solitude for this tether, healing the fractures through shared light, their bond a rebirth under the Deusa's approving arc. The child settled, content in the weave as the packs converged, bowing in unified reverence, the glen transforming from battlefield to cradle of nascent peace. Yet the wind carried a final whisper. The journey to the castle loomed, Eric's confrontation a blade yet to fall, testing this fragile renascimento. Eileen's hand found Soren's over her belly, fingers intertwining in silver-gilded promise, the moon bearing witness to love's tragic bloom. Not reward, but proof in the fire of choice, where exile birthed royalty and curses yielded to destiny's flame. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive. The moon's arc crested the glen like a crown of fractured silver, bathing the bloodied snow in a luminescence that turned every crimson stain into a vein of living prophecy. Eileen's hand remained intertwined with Soren's over the swell of her belly. The child's insistent flutters a bridge between their shared pulses, warm and unyielding against the night's encroaching frost. The packs encircled them now, a unified ring of fur and shadow, Thorn's kin mingling with Soren's wolves, their low whines harmonizing into a solemn dirge that echoed off the quartz-veined rocks. The air thrummed with the Deusa's residue, thick with the metallic bite of spilled blood and the sharp resin of pine, as if the forest itself exhaled in anticipation of the weave's culmination. Soren's grip tightened, not in possession, but in the quiet desperation of one who had glimpsed salvation's edge. His breath ghosted her temple, ragged from the fray, carrying the faint, herbal tang of his wounds, now staunched by her makeshift bindings. At 46, the king's melancholy had etched him into a figure of tragic endurance. Gray eyes shadowed by the ghosts of choices unmade, his broad frame leaning into her as if her presence alone could unburden the crown's weight. Guilt still lingered in his silence, a philosophical specter. Power without her light was but a throne of ice, crumbling under mercy's absent fire. "The castle awaits," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her bones, stirring the silver current in her veins. "Eric's lair in the spires, Your sight will guide the blade, but the cost. It falls to us both. Eileen's heart clenched. The wind whipping her unbound hair like tendrils of night, its chill slicing through the thin shift that clung to her sweat-dampened skin. The Pathfinder's gift pulsed faintly now, visions flickering at the periphery. The ice castle's halls, towering spires piercing the aurora like frozen spears, where Eric schemed in chambers lit by stolen lunar flames. He, the shadow advisor, twisted oaths into nooses, his greed fueling the realm's wars, border clashes that bled clans dry, all to forge a puppet throne from Grimclaw's poisoned gold. Sacrifice loomed in those glimpses, visceral as the contraction rippling through her abdomen, a harbinger that the child would not wait for thrones or trials. Union or severance? The dilemma coiled in her chest, romantic and tragic. To bind her exile's freedom to his duty-forged world, healing the fractures through their tether, or to birth alone in the wild's embrace, curing only her solitude at the expense of the realm's unraveling. They moved as one toward the ridge's descent, the packs flanking them like living armor, paws etching silent paths through the drifts. Thorn walked at Soren's side, his scarred face set in grim resolve, the contrition of revelation hardening into purposeful steel. "Eirik dies by my hand," he vowed, voice rough as gravel under boot, eyes flicking to Eileen with a deference born of her mercy's light. "For the blindness I wrought." The journey blurred in the moon's descent, hours folding into a cadence of footsteps on snow, the wind's howl a distant weevo that mourned the old world's passing. Eileen's steps grew labored, each one a negotiation with the growing ache low in her back, the child's movements sharpening into demands that mirrored the realm's urgent plea. Dawn's pale veil lifted as they crested the final rise, the ice castle emerging like a behemoth from the mist-shrouded valley, towers of glacial blue thrusting skyward, banners of wild clans limp in the still air, stained with the red of recent skirmishes. Guards at the gates faltered, their spears lowering in awe at the converging packs, whispers rippling like cracks in frost. The king's return, the Omega's glow, the eclipse child's shadow preceding her. Soren led them through the yawning portals, his hand never leaving Eileen's, the warmth of his palm a constant against the stone's unrelenting cold. Torches flickered in iron sconces, casting golden flickers that danced with the silver in her eyes, illuminating murals of ancient battles where blood and moon intertwined as eternal symbols. Eirik's chamber lay at the spire's apex, ascended by a spiral stair that wound like a serpent's coil, the air growing thinner, laced with the acrid scent of forbidden herbs. Grimclaw's sorcery, twisting loyalties into thorns. Eileen's visions guided them, silver threads pulling truths from the gloom, hidden passages, wards shattered by the child's latent power humming through her. At the chamber's threshold, Eric awaited, a gaunt figure cloaked in raven furs, his eyes twin coals burning with defiance. "The cursed whelp," he sneered, voice a venomous hiss that echoed off the iced walls, a ritual dagger gleaming in his grip, etched with runes of eclipse-born blight. "You bring doom to our gates, King. The realm purges weakness, starting with her." The confrontation ignited like dry tinder under flame. Thorn lunged first, a blur of muscle and fury, grappling Eric in a clash that shook the chamber, fists cracking bone, blood spraying to spatter the frost-laced floor in fresh sigils. Soren shielded Eileen, his body a wall against the advisor's thrashing shadows, conjured wisps that clawed at the air with icy talons. But the true battle raged within her. A contraction seized her mid-stride, doubling her over, the pain a white-hot forge that blurred vision and breath. "Now!" she gasped, the gift surging unbidden, silver light erupting from her core to illuminate Eirik's secrets, ledgers of bribes, maps of betrayed borders, the eclipse's true omen not curse, but renewal's spark. Thorn's blade found its mark, sinking into Eric's chest with a wet finality, the traitor's body crumpling as his shadows dissolved into harmless mist. The chamber fell silent, save for Eileen's labored breaths, the child's insistent push demanding release. Soren knelt beside her on the blood-slicked stones, his hands cradling her face, gray eyes brimming with the raw vulnerability of redemption's dawn. "Choose," he whispered, though the word carried no demand, only the ethical plea of a king unmade by love's resistant bloom. Union. To heal the realm through this birth, sacrificing her isolation for the throne's mending, their bond the fire that tempered guilt into grace. Or freedom's solitary cure, birthing in exile's arms, leaving him to the crown's cold grasp. The pain crested, a visceral wave that tore a cry from her throat, the Deuce's light flooding the spire in silver radiance. Packs gathered at the threshold, their forms silhouetted against torchlight, Weavos rising in reverent chorus as the child emerged, slippery, wailing, a tiny form with eyes of storm-gray flecked gold, marked by the moon's kiss. Eileen held the infant to her breast, exhaustion yielding to profound warmth, the silver current ebbing into quiet peace. Soren's arms encircled them both, his tears tracing paths down weathered cheeks, melancholy dissolving in the philosophical truth. Strength was mercy's choice, love the proof that wove exile into royalty. The realm stirred below, clans converging under banners renewed, the ice castle warming with hearth fires kindled anew. Eileen met Soren's gaze, acceptance sealing their union. Not immediate ecstasy, but a tragic renascimento, where blood and moon birthed healing from sacrifice's forge. The child cooed, a spark against the dawn's light filtering through iced windows, promising destinies mended under the Deuce's eternal watch. The wind sighed through the spires, carrying the scent of thawing frost and nascent spring as the moon faded, yielding to a sun that gilded their fragile triad in gold, redemption's flame, alive and unquenched. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.